All right, so we'll start off with the presentation. So this was my capstone project. For any people who don't know what a capstone is, it's your final project when you're getting out of school. I got my bachelor's in computer science. So the capstone that I wanted to do was originally an entirely different system, or different product, I should say, very similar system. And I'm going to demonstrate that today. So build the system first. The UFC was just the problem to point it at, right? So the model itself was identify your source material, which we were able to achieve through CSVs that were posted to GitHub that were pretty reliable, but then we validated against scraping other fight channels like UFC. We then had to clean, parse, and merge into our Postgres database, which as of today is 8,701 fights total. We then had to build out the feature system, and I'll explain what that was more in depth. And then we utilized XGBoost. For those who don't know, XGBoost is a machine learning model that's like very cheap on compute, that goes through decision trees and then package it all up and serve it into our Django front end. So where XGBoost lives here, if you could see, is this is the star system of what is AI, right? So machine learning, a lot of people use these words interchangeably, but they're really very different aspects. Um, So I think this explains it a little bit better. Where the app is, if you think about it as an iceberg, you just see kind of the endpoint or what ChatGPT shows you, but really in the back end is, depending on the complexity of the system, quite intensive. That's why they're spending hundreds of billions or close to $1 trillion on this type of infrastructure, um, to serve you, right? So the whole idea behind this was I went with a depth of 6 trees, which I think is explained a little bit better in the following slides. But essentially, it's a decision, yes, no, that it trains itself on. The reason I went with 6 was because I didn't want it to go too deep. If it went too deep, I would see in many cases a regression in the output of predicting, based off the variables that I had. So now the real problem was probably data. If I had a lot more data, including, what's their medical history, you know, scraping the social media accounts of their families, their fiance, their wife, their girlfriends, whatever, you could probably get a lot more insights and decisions there, off sentiment analysis. But, for a capstone project, that was too much. So one problem that we faced was simply you could not put the data, and this is why we had to clean the data once we retrieved it even further, because the model itself needed it to be served in a very specific manner. So, and that's kind of, what I'm seeing across other applications in my life that we've been working on is, uh, just that you need to like fully clean your system, make sure every ETL process loads exactly how the next system downstream wants it to, right? So with XGBoost, we wanted to make sure that the model only saw all the fights prior to, um, a certain date and time. So if when we had to front load the system with predictions, we didn't want it to have training data based off future fights, which could skew the system. So we had to make sure, starting from the ground floor, every fight beforehand was beforehand and not we're training on fights that are in the future even the current fight, so it wouldn't skew that. Going back to what XG boost really is in the tree system, each tree is really a yes/no decision. Like I said, I went with a depth of 6 decisions and then 200 trees per prediction. So this is kind of what that decision tree would look like, and then it will attach a weight to that decision. So every decision it makes, we get an aggregate. At the end, we just get a sum value. I don't necessarily have visibility into the black box, but we get the sum total at the end. So you can see here's a pretty good example of simulated data that I did on a real decision and what it probably looked like. So one of the values was, reach differential. So we were just seeing based off the tabular data in the database, was it higher, lower, yes, no, and then it would make its decision and fork down the trees. And I think this is a pretty good video I made with a remotion last night to demonstrate that. So this is what a 200 tree walk prediction looks like, and obviously it's significantly faster on when it actually runs. But we can see how it changes, the running verdict of a singular fighter. Are there any questions to this point?
Yeah, just to make sure. So this is a fight prediction, like for helping with sports betting, just at the basic.
Yeah, yeah. So what I really wanted to build was the system, and we'll see later, the prediction was just, you could plug and play with that as you wish. The the system as a whole, which is, cleaning, parsing, producing features, how do you do that all, was a learning experience for me. And, wrapping it all in Kubernetes so that I never have to touch it. Like, it would just run, right? But in this case, my partner really was gung ho on doing UFC fight predictions.
I have a question as well.
Yeah.
So I missed the first bit of the talk. I got here a little late. Did you discuss feature set yet, or did you just?
Hey Mo, how's it going?
Good, guys.
So here's what we had. So one of the other issues is we had 8,701 fights, of which there were some draws and stuff that I wanted to eliminate from our predictions, which is, a problem if I wanted to solve later, I would have, but I just figured I'm only going to care about the data that's win or loss, rather than draw, because that was a third variable I didn't want to deal with. I just wanted win or loss. So we cut down our predictions to that we counted to 8,430, of which as of today, 8,418 are resolved. We have 12 predictions right now. So divide that. Our accuracy was 63.6%, not including draws. So just pure win-loss. So yeah, and then Vegas odds were set around 65%. They win about 65% of the time based off whatever they favor. So, not bad for just purely looking at fight data.
You say just fight data. So you literally had like a table of fights, and the individual like win losses, whatever round or whatnot?
Yeah. So uh, I have it on my GitHub. I could show it. I could share my GitHub link with you. I have I believe a .SQL with all my table entries and everything that you could look at. I believe there were north of 10 tables. I may have cut it down, uh, but each table was, fight, location, and then I mapped all the data that way. Fighters, individual record, all of which you could, just pull with simple SQL queries. Um, yeah. So then the system I was really interested in at the time, when I was at my internship in IT, was everybody was talking about Kubernetes, right? So I'm like, well, I have to learn this. So, and I was like, great, I don't have to sit here. I could just set a cron job or in a pod. So I have a watchdog. I can run the scrapes automatically. I could pull the fighters photos, and then I can run the predictions, and then serve it
Check,
all on the
check, one,
site.
two.
Yep. So at a very high level, this is kind of what I've produced, um, which I wanted to do it for free. Now, in hindsight, I would much rather serve this on like an EC2 or a Hetzner, um, but just to do it all on my device locally, local AI, just pulling the data from the outside and serving it to the outside. I thought it was pretty cool. So we have, our web app, our database, and our XGBoost all in separate pods within the same cluster, which then has a watchdog that runs every 60 seconds to make sure we're serving over Tailscale funnel to the public, right? So I don't know if anybody's familiar with Tailscale, but it was really useful for me to, put my device that's on my desk and then my laptop on the Tailscale network, which I could then, SSH very cleanly in, uh, and it serves end-to-end encryption, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. And I could add anybody I wanted to my tailnet, which would then allow that person to serve as well and get in. So it was pretty nice working with somebody and just putting them on the tailnet. It was super easy to set up. And then, like I said, if I had more just rows of data, I don't think that would have helped much. I think I needed outside um, data fields, external variables. Um, Now, that's hard to say without actually having the data, but also 8,000, fights to train on over 8,000 isn't quite enough. I think you need, when I was talking to some of the mathematicians, like a petabyte to really like dial it in, was what they said is kind of their industry standard for predictions.
Petabyte of data?
Yeah.
Just fights or other variables?
No, to get like a solid, um, so that those are people in mathematical computer sciences. We're notating that they use typically a petabyte of data to train their models to then like make articles, research articles about was their this person's standard. So
That's interesting because I don't think we use that much data even at work, and we do a lot of this. Maybe they're using more complex models because
yeah, well,
if I
I am
understand
dealing
correctly,
with
like the more weights, and XGBoost obviously doesn't have a ton because it's a simple decision tree.
yeah,
The more data you need to like make cohesive answers.
right. Yeah, I mean, I was talking to somebody who does supercomputing, so I feel like that does skew probably the conversation quite a bit. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah. So I feel like I understand exactly what you're doing, and you said you talk to mathematicians. So here's my main question, because you said this is your capstone, but let's
Yeah.
say hypothetically, if you wanted to scale it out to actual like enterprise usage, what I'm seeing here is, do you think that you've tuned it with the fight data? Do you feel like you've tuned it towards MMA math or away from MMA math? And secondly, how would you account for like you said, adding more data, which I can understand. Like let's say I would look at who is actually coaching them, if there are reports of if they're sick during fight week, and also how would you handle things like let's say Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz, their very first fight, where every casual fan is going, "Oh, it's Nate Diaz, Nate Diaz," but every hardcore fan knows that Nate Diaz would fuck him up, or excuse my
Right.
language, Diaz would have like messed him up in their first fight, and then
Yeah.
how would you account for their second fight, knowing that Nate Diaz would have, um, he would be coming in with the more to lose.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know necessarily because when I was reviewing, I remember the first time I was reviewing it, there were some fights where I was like, this guy is favored, you know, significantly by Vegas odds. Like when I was individually looking at some of the output, I was like, yeah, that's wrong. And then after reviewing after the fact, I like to look at the um what is it, the outlier quartiles where, and there were some that were like really wrong where its prediction value was like 99% that, Conor McGregor was going to win, and then he lost, right? So there's still a lot of that. To tune that, I mean, like I said, I think you'd have to figure out what are the external weights and really understand the sport as a whole in tuning this. I think statistically speaking, there's too many outside variables for something like a sport to base that off of, at least that I'm capable of doing, because now you're dealing with like how well did the person sleep, right? Does that have an effect on them? What's their home life like, right? Like just being human, a human to human combat sport is going to have so many external variables than just the fight stats, right?
Yeah, completely.
You know, it
There's definitely ways to do it, and you're on the right path. It just depends how much you want to stick with it and how much,
right.
like you said, how much data you would want to actually collect. Like I would
Yeah.
look at, for example, Mark Hunt versus Brock Lesnar, and if you watch the UFC Fight Week videos, most people would say Mark Hunt has one punch KO power, but then he was playing video games like all of training week. So how do you put that into fight data? You know?
Hey, that's exactly it, right? So, like, I feel like if I were to actually go for it, the first thing that I would do personally is go for social media sentiment, right? So, not necessarily like what they're posting, but what are the masses, take a poly market approach and say, like, what do the masses think about, what he's posting? Um, and go from there. Like, that would be my next step if I was really into this project.
I'd skew away from that just because there's way more casuals who are gonna have bad opinions than there are like hardcore fans who are actually religiously following the fighters and might know. Like I would tune more for
Because yeah, you're
Joe
dealing with the
Rogan's opinion
challenge.
than social media.
Yeah, that's true too. Because you're also dealing with like, okay, well, these are the people that follow this person, right? So like, if you were following the other person, they would probably both have skewed data.
But even then, you can still use unsupervised learning to kind of distinguish like who the groups of thought are, right?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's more like how in the weeds do you want to go and commit to this. For me, my main commitment was to building out the system, right? So like with this, you could take this out, and I now have a system I could essentially replicate and just tune the database, tune a new model, right? Like with open source models going so fast, is XGBoost the best? Is it best to go down decision trees? Should I use something like a GPT model? Should I go have it get external data at the time of prediction? It's hard for me to say, but you now have a foundational system that you could make all those decisions and work off of, right? So that's all I got.
Nice. Yeah, it's an awesome project.
Yeah.
And I guess my question would be, is this just like a portfolio thing, or would you actually be looking at trying to expand this and scale it up into like an actual product? Because that would
Oh,
that would be
yeah.
what
I
I'm talking to next.
I saw somebody, his name was Data by Pharaoh, that was doing this for NFL. And it seemed to me that it was more about the social media marketing because he wasn't getting odds this close to, or maybe he was. It's hard to say because the season was only halfway in. But at the
Wait,
time, I
Mike,
don't recall his predictions were anywhere as good as Vegas. But he was claiming offers. So I don't personally plan on, taking this any further. But that's just me.
can you scroll
That's
through? I want to see what the predictions are.
Yeah.
What your model
So
says.
like here's the predictions for the 250 that ran. Um, And then the nice thing is, like, I have this on this report dashboard, we could search for a fight and we could see, and I had produced, and this is also, a caveat is the reasoning is not actually the reasoning, it's a prediction of why it came up with that reasoning, right? So you can never get a full look into the black box, but the prediction was a point in time favor. Oh, okay. Here's the real confidence. Yeah. So I suppose I took that feature out when I went to prod, but um, yeah.
Question: did you ever consider comparing your simulated results against like EA's UFC 4 for the PS5?
I didn't even know that was a thing, so I did not do that uh, level of discovery.
Mike, have you given this to like an AI and asked it to like make improvements or do something different and give you different type of results, or is that or train it?
Well, what I was thinking of doing was I had learned about this LoRa fine tuning, that it was super cheap um, during my creation of this capstone project. And I was thinking, well, if I'm already standardizing all the data, making predictions, validating or invalidating the decision trees, right? I could do that, but I just wasn't. I was capturing the raw value at the end of the trees, which they called the leaf. So the leaf was the only thing I was truly capturing. If I had been able to log or had the foresight to figure out how to log all those decision weights, I'd be willing to bet you would be able to take all of that data and potentially fine tune a model.
Hmm.
But again, I think you also need external variables that are not easy to come by for the best results, that
And
is.
then, and then if you include draws, you said what would happen?
Uh, if I included draws, my predictions would be skewed by about 300, 300 by the denominator by 300. So whatever that comes out to. So, 5,350 over 8,700 essentially.
Yeah. Plus, draws like literally never happen in the UFC. And with this kind of thing, if you made this like a serious thing, people really just want to be told what to bet on, so draws would just completely ruin the whole. Yeah, so I can see why you cut them out.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. Because this and at the time when we first started this, we were looking at